Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tuckahoe's Historic Preservation Commission meeting. I would like to officially call to order tonight's April 21st, 2022 meeting. To begin, if I could ask everyone to please rise as together we recite the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Great, thank you. And for our roll call, I will ask the members tonight we will each introduce ourselves. I am Jenny Steinhagen, and I am joined by
Josh Gaccione.
Unfortunately, Ladislao Castellanos had an urgent situation arise and is not able to join with us this evening. He is okay and is attending the next meeting, which will be held in May. There are two items of business on tonight's agenda. We have a public meeting and we have a recognition of some new inquiries into potential landmark nominations here in Tuckahoe. So in that order, we will begin with our public meeting. This public meeting revolves around 230 White Plains Road, also known as the Wart House. In February of 2022, the Historic Preservation Commission received and accepted a completed landmark nomination form for 230 White Plains Road. The following month, in March, at the Historic Preservation Commission meeting, it was announced that at this April meeting, the public would be invited to not only consult the nomination form that was available online, but to also share additional information or participate in discussion. So that is what we are doing tonight with our public meeting. I know that there is a signatory of the nomination form here tonight who will be saying a few words, but again, anyone is invited and absolutely welcome to come up to the podium and share information and ideas with us. So to get started, I will read, as stated here, 230 White Plains Road, also known as the Wart House, to determine if a recommendation shall be made to the Village Board of Trustees to designate 230 White Plains Road as an historic local landmark. Because this commission, in fact, receives nominations, holds public meetings, ultimately takes a vote whether or not to recommend to the Tuckahoe Board of Trustees that they then open up a public meeting and take a vote to make a site in Tuckahoe and a landmark here in Tuckahoe. So with that said, let us now invite anyone to the podium to share any information about 230 White Plains Road, the Wart House.
My name is Sal Provenzano. I live at 11 River Street in Tuckahoe. I am the treasurer and communications chair for Friends of the Wart House. And on behalf of Friends of the Wart House, I want to thank the Historic Landmark Committee for accepting our application. And I have a copy of the application here, all 62 pages of it, of which I'm not going to be going through every page, thank God. But I did put together a summary of the criteria that was on the application that, according to the landmark law, a landmark should have criteria that is stated within the application that would make it a landmark. So just wanted to go over a few of those things. Before I start, I wanted to just read our mission, the mission of Friends of the Wart House. It's pretty straightforward. The mission of the Friends of the Wart House is to conduct activities to preserve, maintain, and generally promote for the public good the historic integrity of the Wart House its associated grounds, and advance education related to same. So I guess the main question that I would have if I was a resident within the village of Tuckahoe is really what makes the Wart House a historic landmark. I mean, we can look at a number of buildings that that maybe are have different things that are revolving around it, or different events that happen. But really, why the Wart House, and why are we just focusing on that? So the premise of our application was that the Wart House, which has been standing in the exact same spot for over 230 years, meets most of the criteria set in the Village of Tuckahoe's historic preservation legislation, qualifying the building and property on the site of 230 White Plains Road for official landmark status. So a little bit of the history of the building. So the building's common name, and people know of the building here in Tuckahoe and Eastchester as the Wart House. Some other names: Wart's Tavern, the Crawford House, Marble Hall, the Old Grifford House. The date of the initial construction of the first structure on that site was prior to 1750, since in 1751 is the date of the deed transfer of the house and land from Edwin Ward to his son Stephen. The original structure was demolished and burnt down by the British in 1778, really in retaliation for the Patriots using that structure, and this was really Loyalist land at that point. Even though it's thought of as no man's land, Loyalists really had control here, so they ended up burning it down in 1778. So the current structure, the current property, consists of the rebuilt dwelling, constructed in the early 1790s, to the exact specifications of the original Wart House. A more recent addition was appended to the original structure many years later. The original structure is 3 stories and possesses a large basement. The 2-story addition is connected to the main building by doorways and stairs, and the wood frame structure rests on a stone foundation with lime mortar. So now we're going to get into the actual criteria that is included in the application. Is the Wart House really up to landmark status? So criteria A: possesses special character or aesthetic value as part of the cultural, architectural, social, or economic history of the village. Now, without a doubt, the Wart House has significantly contributed to the cultural, architectural, social, and economic history of Tuckahoe and Eastchester, and New York State for that matter. It was originally a farmhouse, which became a private dwelling. It was a tavern. It's a meeting place. It was at first the Royal Post Office when the British were still in charge, and then it became the United States Post Office. Benjamin Franklin himself put the mile marker in front in 1762. It was the military headquarters during the Revolutionary War for both the Patriots and the British. It was a stagecoach stop, and it was the location of the first Catholic Mass in Eastchester, and it was conducted, I believe, by the pastor of a Catholic parish in New Rochelle. And because of the Irish immigrants that were working in the quarries, they ended up having the first Mass right there in the Wart House in 1850. After that, then the Immaculate Conception Church was founded. So, criteria B is identified with persons or events significant in local, state, or national history. Few, if any, Westchester homes preserve the story of the creation of the American nation, as does the Wart House. The site encapsulates the armed struggles, suffering, and political divisions during the American Revolution. Captain Samuel Crawford, Stephen and Ruth Ward, Edmund and Phoebe Ward, as well as 4 American founding fathers are associated with the Wart House: Benjamin Franklin, John Jay, George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, British Sir William Howe, who he was the one that used the Wart House as his headquarters during the Battle of White Plains. Royal Governor William Tyrone, British Captain John Simcoe, who assassinated Samuel Crawford at that spot, French General Rochambeau, Jonathan Ward, and then eventually in the early 1800s, or I should say 1830, President Martin Van Buren actually slept at the Ward House because he was touring the Tuckahoe quarries, which were nationally significant at that time. Now we move to criteria C. Is the birthplace or grave of a historical figure or of outstanding importance? The Ward House property served as the resting place for scores of patriot militia slain in battle. Their bodies remained interred on Ward House land for over 130 years and were uncovered in the early 1900s. Several were reinterred in the historic St. Paul's Churchyard, 5 miles south on Post Road. Some most likely remain in unmarked graves in the vicinity of the site. There's no guarantee that they got all of the soldiers, both British and patriots, that were slain there. We move to criteria D. Embodies the distinguishing characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or design style, or is a valuable example for the use of indigenous materials or craftsmanship. The stone foundation of the Ward House was laid in the early 1790s, and quite possibly earlier, as part of the foundation of the original house, known to be standing at the same site in 1754. There are existing materials in the house, including wooden beams on the 3rd floor, which are believed to be original to the 1790s construction. The Ward House is the typical Georgian-style dwelling of a prosperous farmer and landowner. It is a rare survivor in southern Westchester in the 21st century due to the destruction and abandonment of many houses during the War of Independence and the subsequent development of farmland into suburban towns and villages beginning in the mid-19th century and going into the 20th century. Criteria F represents an established familiar visual feature of the community by virtue of its unique location or singular physical characteristic. The Ward House has been standing in the same spot for 230 years. The property and history that took place have been written about and documented by professional and amateur historians for over a century. Much information exists about how valuable the history of the Ward House is, not only to Tuckahoe, Bronxville, and Eastchester, but also Westchester County, New York State, and the United States. Even George Washington and French General Rochambeau knew about the strategic importance of the Ward House and its exact location. The Ward House location was included in Patriot, British, and French military maps during the Revolutionary War. In conclusion, on January 20th, 2022, the Ward House was determined eligible for state and national recognition by the Commissioner of the Office of Parks, Recreation, and Historic Preservation. This is not the Tuckahoe legislation, this is the state. The Ward House is recognized by the state of New York to have 2 criteria of inclusion. 1, associated with the lives of persons significant in our past, which we've gone over. 2, it embodies the distinctive characteristics of a type, period, or method of construction, or represents the work of a master, or possesses high artistic values, or represents a significant and distinguishable entity whose components may lack individual distinction. Again, these are the words of the state, not of us. This was in their comment. So this was my original end. And I don't know if anyone saw the wreath-laying ceremony on March 16th, but that wreath-laying was to commemorate the 245th anniversary of the assassination of Captain Samuel Crawford. So that wreath-laying was about an 18-minute video that was shown, and it was carried on YouTube links and on the Tuckahoe television system. And it was posted on a historic site, and we ended up getting, or there was a comment that was shared on Facebook from a former Immaculate Conception Elementary School student, now grown, after viewing that 18-minute video, recorded that, and this was his comment. He said, "I always loved the beautiful White House opposite my school, and many times walked by it, appreciating as a young boy its charm. Unfortunately, we were not given history lessons about its place in American history. Thanks to the Tuckahoe History Committee for posting this wonderful tribute." So, in closing, I reemphasize what our mission is. Our mission, and we're even now more committed to our mission, committed to the preservation, to the maintenance, and to the promotion of the Wart House for its significance as a home and significance as a site, but even more important, it's significant as a historic landmark that should be taught to our current students and to the students that are to come, in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal. Thank you for distilling the information that is in the nomination form to your slides, and for getting to the heart of what this commission is tasked with, which is evaluating any potential landmark nomination based on how well the criteria are met. And those criteria came from the model landmark law that is recommended by the state of New York and is in use by many villages and towns throughout the state and the country. And what we are absolutely using, it's in our legislation in section 5, the criteria there. Would anyone else like to come up and speak?
My name is Dr. Edward Powers. I live at 6 McKinley Street. That's Bronxville, Tuckahoe, New York. I have the honor of sharing the property with both the Bronxville tax receivers and Tuckahoe Eastchester tax receivers. I want to thank Sal for his work, and what a wonderful presentation. I speak in favor of making the Wart House giving it full historic recognition. 6 McKinley, I purchased that house a little bit over 20 years ago from Elizabeth Leckie, who's been involved with this committee, with the historic committee. And she relates the story that back in the 1930s, they were digging on the property. I have the house, and I have a second piece of land next to it. It's 100% in Tuckahoe. When they were digging, they found a cannonball. Later on, the kids came up to me and said, "Oh, we know what war that's from." I said, "What war?" "The Korean War." I said, "No way." So it turned out it was a British cannonball. And if you think of it, the British always said, take the high ground. So you're talking out Route 22, which goes right in front of the Wart House. And it's really, Route 22 is a historic street. You don't think of it riding it every day, but that goes from Mount Vernon right to the Canadian border. And so the British were stationed up there on Route 22 in the high ground. And when they were digging, as I said, they found a cannonball. It was a British cannonball. And the irony is that the area down below, where you have the Bronxville School and some of the $10 million houses, that's where the British were firing on the Patriots, okay? So again, I think it's so much is transient in this society. This is a real jewel that we have, this structure here in Tuckahoe. And I speak very strongly endorsing this. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing your comments and also for that story about the cannonball. Would anyone else like to share information or speak about anything related to 230 White Plains Road.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is James Veneruso. I'm a managing partner of the firm of Veneruso, Curto, Schwartz, and Curto. I'm speaking on behalf of my client, Biggest Fish Westchester, LLC. The commission's faced with an interesting, what I consider a dilemma, and that is there are a number of unique factors which I request the commission to consider. We have a property that lies within a single-family district, privately owned. We know that the property was used by Concordia as a dormitory, purchased in 1944. So it's classified as a non-conforming pre-existing use. So you have this unique situation where you have a dormitory in a single-family house, which was chopped up, divided. I've been inside, and I know many of you have. Our client has been very transparent about allowing access and folks to see inside of it. And clearly, its interior was drastically, and that's an understatement, transformed in order to create a dormitory. Has no kitchen facilities. It has communal bathrooms, and the last renovations listed with the building department were 1960, as far as interior renovations. It has vinyl sidings. In 2011, property card indicates that the windows were replaced. At some point in time, it was noted during the initial presentation that a two-story addition was placed on the structure. So we submit that at this point in time, structure is not a historical building at this point in time because of this transformation. And I also want to emphasize that the structure itself, listed in the application to the commission, indicates that it's a safe structure and was inhabited until 2021. If you've toured the facility, I doubt if you would have had one of your students or anyone else in that building, frankly. It's not a building that appeared safe to me, and I believe if you've toured it, you may come away with the same impression. So it's highly questionable whether the structure itself is safe. So we have a situation where people have toured it. If you've seen it, you know the condition, and the question then becomes, okay, what's to become of it? What's to become of it? What's the end game here in terms of this building? And as I said before, we question whether at this point in time, in its present condition, with all the changes that have occurred, whether it can be truly classified as a historic structure. In addition, I asked the commission to consider that to renovate it into a functioning single-family home may not be feasible. We're looking into that very question now. It may not be feasible to do it, given the age of the structure, given what a renovation would entail in terms of walls, in terms of the structure itself. And so when I mentioned the end game, what's the effect of this landmarking? And is there another way to accomplish perhaps what the advocates are advocating? And again, our client has engaged in a number of discussions, willing to engage in further discussions, because again, we're concerned about the end game here. In other words, if it's landmarked, the effect on this, would it be feasible to even renovate, which we doubt. And so with that, I would also ask the commission's indulgence to prepare, if we choose to do so, a supplemental, a submission, if you will, dealing with those points. And if we could have until May 6th in order to make such a submission. And I thank you for listening to the presentation. And I again reiterate, these are unique factors to the situation that you have in front of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for sharing that information and those comments. We will absolutely take them under advisement, and I believe that we can absolutely receive documents, as you suggest, at a later point, and especially before the next meeting.
Sure. Madam Chair, so since the next meeting's May 12th, I think by May 6th, if you receive all the documents from anybody, the public in general, you could take into the consideration all of those documents and make a decision hopefully on May 12th.
Okay. I absolutely welcome the receipt of those documents, and we will take a look at them. And again, we thank you for sharing your comments with us.
And any other documents if they're out there. Any mystery documents we don't know about.
Any and all information pertinent to this particular house, its past, its present, is welcome and encouraged. Does anyone else tonight want to share any additional comments or information? As suggested, we will not be taking a vote tonight on the decision of the commission, whether or not to recommend to the Board of Trustees that they then open up a public hearing, but we'll carry that over at least until the next meeting in May. The nomination form that Sal referenced and we have had for some time now is posted on the Tuckahoe.com website. As Sal mentioned, there are 62 pages of information about the house, its history, and how it has been documented through the centuries, and the role that house has played in our local area. And so I believe you mentioned that was submitted to the state, and they came back with a recommendation based on 2 of the criteria. Yeah, I think you mentioned that at the end of your presentation. So if it were to go, for example, for a national register, it goes through the state, right? But it could be at the national register level.
I believe that the the application, or that that was a separate application that went through. I believe that Alan Strawber had done the inquiry about the national landmark status, and then that had come back back in January. So when they reviewed the information that was provided in that, that it came back that they felt that it was that there were 2 criteria for national recognition as well.
Based on their criteria. Thank you. I don't know if we have any additional comments or questions.
My name is Dick Forliano. I'm Leicester Town Historian. I've been town historian since 1988. And in 2002, Tuckahoe was celebrating its 100th anniversary. And a bus tour was done of the town, and the final stop was the Wart House. And Eastchester and Tuckahoe, well, Eastchester town board members and Tuckahoe village board members were there, and I dressed up as Stephen Ward. And the house was in impeccable condition at that time. I also was on the faculty at Concordia from 1990, and I stopped in 2006. The people who were in the house, the vast majority, were employees at the college, faculty members. Now, there were brief periods of time, and we have to investigate that, when students inhabited the house. But 20 years ago, the house was in impeccable condition. And as time went on, and as Concordia faced financial difficulties, they couldn't maintain the house as well as they would have liked. But I think it's important to investigate that the house was in sound condition. In the last few years, it was ignored, in my opinion. But being involved in historic preservation throughout the county, there are many homes that have been preserved that were in much worse condition. And I understand that there are issues that have to be dealt with, but I just want to make that very clear that 2 decades ago, the house was in impeccable condition, and it didn't deteriorate until the last few years. So that's something I'd like the commission to keep in mind. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing your comments.
Hello, Elaine Provenzano, 11 River Street. Thank you so much for this wonderful discussion about such an important site. I grew up here, and as Richard was saying, I was at the celebration for the 100th anniversary. If any of you have been to Williamsburg, if any of you know about Colonial Williamsburg, if any of you know about historic preservation, it doesn't matter the condition of a house, and things can be turned back and restored. And there are also a lot of grants that are available, and especially since the house has been recognized to be on the by the state, it's already in a position to potentially receive funding. And we have an opportunity here to be heroes, to save this house, to come together as a community. And I understand, you know, when you purchase a house, maybe not knowing the value of it, but now being able to foster it being saved and restored and landmarked for the community, finally receiving that recognition. So thank you so much for looking at the application. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Would anyone else like to speak to the Ward House tonight, 230 White Plains Road? A lot of interesting and important points that were brought up tonight, and we will absolutely be taking all of them as well as additional information that comes our way under advisement and under consideration. And this conversation will continue at least into May at our May 12th meeting. Okay, super. So we have one other item on tonight's agenda, and that is a discussion of potential landmark nominations, including local landmarks, interior landmarks, and historic districts for consideration as historic local landmarks. Because as this commission is off and running, we have already, since our last meeting, received 2 inquiries into potential landmark nomination forms. One is for a house of worship that has been serving members of our Tuckahoe community for over 80 years, the AME Church, as well as it has been brought to our attention that there is a group of individuals researching the Washington Hotel, an 1883 structure associated with Samuel Fee of the Marble Quarries from Tuckahoe. So we will be anticipating any developments with the nomination forms as the research continues there, but we have a list on the Tuckahoe.com site, and it's worth noting that list has been there publicly available since May of last year. With the list, there's 13 entries. I'm hesitant to say that there are 13 sites because some of them have 2 in one, and some of them reference monuments, etc. But there are at least 13 listings on the Tuckahoe.com site of potential landmarks for Tuckahoe. The Wart House is on there, the Washington Hotel is on there, and even some that aren't there, such as the AME Church, could certainly be considered. And individuals are welcome to contact us at any time with ideas and suggestions for potential landmark nominations in Tuckahoe, which is why we are here.
And unless I have this wrong, I believe that those have been on the master plan even longer than that. So they've been around, right?
Yes, many of the structures that are included in that list of 13 that I referenced have been included with photos even in the comprehensive master plan for Tuckahoe dating back decades. And you can see the Wart House, for example, recognized, and other sites, the Washington Hotel, the Depot Square, recognized as integral to Tuckahoe and its value to its community. So those have been brought to our attention, to be continued with those. As far as miscellaneous business, unless there is anything else that anyone wants to bring up or add, we will be here in May, a Thursday night at 7 p.m. on the 12th for the continuation of our discussion on 230 White Plains Road. The agenda will be posted in anticipation of that. So unless there is anything else, I'd like, again, to thank everyone who took the time to come here tonight and share your comments, which we'll review. We look forward to our next meeting in May. Thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned. Have a great night.